Hello, Zub here. I'm just putting together a tutorial. This tutorial is actually for my animation students, but I'm also going to open it up to everyone and just put it on the net for people to download. Um, as part of this tutorial, I'm going to be going through how to scan and prep line art for an animation model sheet, but it also has a bunch of little scanning techniques and preparation stuff that could be useful just in general for any kind of comic book art or things like that. The style isn't as much important as it is the techniques. Now, I originally had a character design at school that I was going to use for this tutorial, and then I forgot it there in classic Zubby style. So I did up a new sketch about half an hour ago that I'm going to use for the tutorial. And you're looking here at this and you're thinking, man, this is going to be weak. But what I also want to show here is the stages that I went through before I actually scan in the final. So this is going to be Jim Hawkins from Treasure Island. I just sort of picked it out of my head. Wanted to do a young kid, kind of 12 or 13 years old, and started sketching things out. This is the initial gestural stage. This has nothing to do with the scanning. I'm just talking about the drawing itself at this point. Um, I wanted to get an attitude to the character. I wanted to get a sense of proportion, come up with some interesting shapes, look at the style that I wanted to kind of play with, and get some simple costuming there. So this is actually a scan of my initial gesture. I had to darken it to even make it show up because on the paper it's wispy light. It's very thin light blue lines as I'm building the construction and coming up with the pose. In this case, I tilted the shoulders and the pelvis, so it's not just your standard kind of static standing pose. He's got a little bit more attitude to the whole thing. He's got the wide young eyes and whatnot. From there, what I did is I take a regular blue line pencil and I start clarifying those shapes and I start making decisions about where I really want these lines to flow. And that's where the second stage comes in. So from there, I start clarifying the shapes, improving the construction, making more decisive decisions about the line art and where all the lines are going to lie. Now here for the line of the shoulder, you see I drew it right through the neck. I've still got a center line indicated on the face to help indicate the construction. This stage is really for clarification, making, like I said, those final decisions. But not worrying if a line's not going to be perfect as you're working through the construction of the whole thing. Now the final version, and the one I'm going to be showing you how I scan in and prep before I do another coloring tutorial, is this here. So here's our Jim Hawkins, nice clean crisp line art. All the shapes are clarified, all the lines are clean and ready for coloring for the model sheet that I'm going to be creating. Now, going from this stage to this seems like a really big jump, but it's not as difficult as you may think. And it's not drawn all in the computer or anything like that. There's some scanning tricks that I'm going to show you now as I go through and step through the process of the scan. So let's get to that now. Now I'm using Photoshop CS2, but really any Photoshop, I think after 5, is going to have identical features. So it's not even extremely important which one you're using per se. I call up my scanning software. Again, different scanning software, different interfaces. What's most important is that you're scanning in full color and that you're scanning in at least 300 dpi or dots per inch so that your drawing is going to be high quality for print. The web is 72 dots per inch, your actual monitor, but for print you want to have a higher dots per inch. So in this case I've already previewed the image to make sure it's going to fit on the plate, and then I'll just scan that up. When you're scanning, if you're unsure if you're going to use an image for print or for the web, it's always best to assume that you're going to go for print. It's always easy to downsize a drawing or a digital file to a lower dots per inch, but you can't add more information than you previously had. So if you're ever unsure, or if you just want to cover your bases, make sure that you scan at 300 dpi or above. Some really high-end crisp line art, some guys scan at 1200, but it's not necessary in most cases. 300, 400 dpi is the resolution that we use for cover images, for comic books, things like that, and the line art doesn't break up or look pixelated. When you're looking through a magazine or something and you see an image that looks extremely pixelated, it looks blocky and broken, it's almost guaranteed that it's because they tried to upsize from a lower dots per inch. Okay, so once I've got that scanned in, this is actually my clean line drawing. I'm just going to rotate it. During this tutorial, I'm assuming you've got a basic understanding of Photoshop. If you don't, as you watch, you can follow along with what I'm doing here. So I'm going to rotate the image. I'm going to use the marquee, just isolate the character. Now, as you can see, whoops, hit the wrong thing there. As you can see, the lines are clean on my scan, but they're certainly not those deep, clean black lines that I have on the final. So how did I go about getting that? Well, here's some tricks. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a grayscale image. You may think that you should scan directly into grayscale, but I found, generally speaking, it's better to scan in full color and then make it a grayscale, just because it picks up some of the finer detail. So here I've got the image in grayscale, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get in nice and close to my lines. You can see that they're definitely gray. There's not a blackness to it. And the way I'm going to make it darker is by going into Image, Adjustments, Levels. This neat little thing here has got 3 sliders, black, white, and gray. Now I could slide them back and forth, or I can use the droppers. Let me show you how it works. If I grab this middle slider and I move it across, see how all the lines darken there? Right across the board, and vice versa. Okay? So as I bring that across, it's deepening the lines. If your page is a little bit off-white, you might find that the white turns gray, in which case you want to grab this white slider and pull it this way. Now in this case my page is quite clean, so it shouldn't be necessary. If I want to push this even further, I can grab the black dropper right here, set black point. It's one of the great things about Photoshop. You hover over something, you leave your mouse there, and it'll tell you what it is. And I click on an area that's currently gray that I want to be black. Keep clicking on more gray areas. See how it just deepens everything, makes it all very, very black. Once I like the way it's looking, I hit OK. And now I pull back, and I'm starting to get some deep black lines. Now there's all sorts of little dust specks and things from the scanner that I'm going to need to clean up here, but Photoshop's going to do some of that for me as well. I've also got the top of the page sort of buffeted up against the top of the scanner there. Okay, so now what I want to do, and this is another nifty little trick, because this is a pencil line, you see how it's all broken up here? It doesn't have a clean, solid finish like an ink line does. Now, I could have gone through and inked this whole character, but to save myself some time and trouble, I did it with pencil, but I want to have a final look that's reminiscent of ink. It's not going to be as sensitive as a good ink line, but I do want to have more of that quality. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to show you guys how to cheat. So you go here under Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Whoa, not that much. This slider again, you can go back and forth and choose how much blur you want to have. Now I'm going to blur the lines ever slightly. In this case, about 2 pixels. Now the whole thing has a very soft quality to it, but what it's also doing is it's smearing the line where there were inconsistencies in it and making it more solid. So now when I upsize the image, I'm going to up it to a 1200 dpi size, which makes the image huge. I was just under image size, typing that in. Sorry, I get ahead of myself sometimes. I'm so used to just doing it, I forget to describe which functions I'm doing. Then I go to my mode, and I'm going to change this into image mode bitmap. a 1200 DPI bitmap image. Pow. Now notice that line, solid black. Solid black all the way across. Almost all my lines now are a nice, solid, crisp black line that I can use. I've also got some blackness at the top there. Grab my eraser, quite large. Get rid of some of the actual, almost all the fringes and the dots. Those little gray dots are gone now because when I do a bitmap and I change the threshold to 50% threshold, it'll make everything either black or white, absolute. And that way, it's getting rid of anything that's not the real line. Now it's also cut some of my lines. So here on my original drawing of the dagger, that's actually one solid line. So I need to reconstruct that. If your lines are deep enough and clean enough, then it should be pretty good. But like I said, a few of them may break up a bit. So you got to go through and re-clarify them a bit. Give it a close look, keeping the camera zoomed in on your image. That line there is actually extending past the heel a bit. I'm just going to erase it. And now I've got this clean line version of Jim Hawkins. Looks very professional, looks very crisp, and that I can work with. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I've got one more trick for you. I want to put this character on what's called a floating line art. So I actually don't want the white of the page to be on the same layer as the character line art. This will prove very useful later on when I want to do color holds or color some of the line art in that lush kind of feature animation way. So what I want to do is I want to separate the character from the line art. In this case, it's very simple for me to do so because he is absolute black. Every single pixel is black or it's white. It's 1 or it's 0 essentially. So all I have to do is grab my magic wand, turn off the contiguous option if it's not already turned off. Make sure I'm back in grayscale mode as opposed to bitmap mode. So I go back to grayscale. Size ratio is the same. Click. It will select all the lines of the character. I then delete. Okay? So I'm actually getting rid of the character, but I still have the selection of everywhere that those black pixels were. Alright? It's very important. Create a new layer right here at the bottom, second from the right in my layers palette. Now I've got a transparent layer, usually indicated in Photoshop by the checkers there. When I hit fill on this layer, it fills it all back in, but notice there's no white of the page. Now the character's on what's called a floating transparency. So the line art is distinctly separate from the background. When I turn back on the background layer, the visibility, it looks the same, but it's actually substantially different because the character is on its own layer. That line art is digitally separated from the white of the page. And then I resize it back to 300. What this gives me is now a nice clean grayscale line that's not overly pixelated with a character that's floating on his own transparent layer, which makes it super easy to color in the next tutorial and super easy to work with. You definitely want to back this up, save your file, and you are prepared for the next tutorial I'm going to be covering.